The validity of thousands of baptisms is in question in the Diocese of Phoenix due to the actions of a single priest. While the bishop of the Diocese of Helena, Montana, has effectively banned the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, Pope Francis continues his curial reforms at the Vatican. To get into all of this and much more is the Papal Posse. Editor-in-Chief of the Catholic Thing, Robert Royal from Washington, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray, joins us from Manhattan. Gentlemen, thank you. I want to get your reaction to this situation in the Diocese of Phoenix. Bishop Thomas Olmsted announced this week that Father Andres Arango had performed thousands of baptisms using an incorrect formula of the ritual, saying, "We baptize you instead of I baptize you." Now, Father Arango resigned from his parish this week. He issued a statement on the diocese's website. It reads, "It saddens me to learn that I've performed invalid baptisms throughout my ministry as a priest by regularly using an incorrect formula. I deeply regret my error and how this has affected numerous people in your parish and elsewhere." Father Murray, if one word can invalidate a sacrament, how many other sacraments are invalid? I mean, I've heard innovations at some masses that sound like Ella Fitzgerald scatting.
Raymond, you have to use the words that the Church gives when administering the sacraments. And the words for validity are, "I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." It's written in the ritual. We're trained to say that in the seminary. So for him to vary that was a conscious decision that he wanted to say something else, perhaps with the implication, we, the community, or we, in generality, we baptize. That's not valid. That's not what is intended by the Church. So you have to stick to what's written, because the determination of the wording of the sacraments is not up to individual priests. It's up to the Holy See. The Holy See has said what we need to do. So it's very regrettable. People who were baptized by this priest should go to their local parish and request to be baptized validly.
So they're all invalid. Even that one word has invalidated this sacrament. I mean, you'd think after 16 years of service in parishes and going to seminary that the form and the precision of the sacraments would have been imparted.
Yes, and that's obviously what this priest did not follow. And, I'm glad that he recognizes his error. It's a shame he didn't start doing the right thing from the beginning. But this shows in the Church, we all have to cooperate according to what is the law of the Church and our responsibilities. And priests are not allowed in Church law to change the words of the sacrament, just like they can't change the matter. Let's say somebody wanted to celebrate Mass using cookies and Coke. That's an invalid Mass. Right. It doesn't matter that the priest thinks that's a good thing to do.
Bob, your thoughts on the culture in the Church here in the U.S. that would allow this to happen? I mean, when you hear constant refrains about the evils of rigidity, I guess some see this as a corrective innovation.
Yeah, the details are a bit unclear about where he got the idea that he wanted to say "we baptize." We know that over the past several decades in the Church, there have been movements toward communitarian approaches, to put it that way. At one point, we were saying, "We believe in one God." You remember that even here in the United States, that was a kind of a subtle change that no one knows how it happened. It just sort of happened. But I'm a little bit encouraged by the way this priest has behaved. Now, we know that he actually taught in a seminary in Brazil, or at least worked in a seminary in Brazil, so he's been exposed to a wide variety of different circumstances. We don't yet know how he got into this particular habit. One of the things I'm encouraged about, though, is he did apologize, and he doesn't seem to be a dissident. He apologized to the people. His bishop has kept him in good standing in the diocese. And it looks like it's just one of those regrettable things that inevitably is going to happen when people think that they have a right to kind of freelance with what the Church has been teaching us.
Again, I go back to my first question. I am concerned after sitting while I travel the country at certain masses where the priest freelances all kinds of things, and they say, we, this community, we gather together and we say and agree, this is your body. I mean, when they start saying, and I've heard those sorts of things, does that mean the Mass is invalid, Father Jerry?
If you change the words of consecration, yes, the priest has to read the words as it's written in the missal. If he changes them in any way that invalidates the consecration, that is not permitted. As I said, you can't change the matter either. You can't substitute unleavened bread and wine. You have to use those elements in the correct words. So this is an area where laxism has gotten into the church, as Bob said, and this is a necessary corrective. It's not rigid to follow the law in matters of seriousness, and that's what we need to do here.
This is the downside of condemning rigor, or in its ugly characterization, rigidity. The opposite of that is innovation and make it up as you go, and you end up with sad situations like this where thousands of people now are going to have to get rebaptized. They're running around thinking they're parts of the church, members of the church, and I guess they are not fully vested yet because of the form here. Interestingly, according to the reports, it was the faithful in the Diocese of Phoenix who brought their concerns to the Chancery, and the Vatican issued a corrective as recent as 2020 indicating that "we" is not correct in that formula of baptism, Bob. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it certainly is, and you know, our tendency is to want to read these things in terms of ideologies, and maybe there is something of that going on here, but at the same time, this is kind of a warning that if you start messing with the creed, you know, there's an old poem of Hilaire Belloc's about a child who's messing with the creed and he gets eaten by a lion, and he says, the message is, it is indeed, you shouldn't monkey with the creed. And these sorts of things, I say again, they're virtually inevitable because we've seen it everywhere in the church, and not only in specific rites like baptism.
Yeah, Father, given what we saw in Phoenix, what we see all over the country in certain pockets, there are priests taking liberties with various sacraments. The Mass, baptism being probably the most pronounced. What should the faithful do if they encounter something like this?
Yeah, if you hear the priest say something that is not according to the ritual, you know, stop him and ask, Father, did you say the right words? Because, you know, there's also a possibility in individual case the priest might stumble and drop a word here or there, not know what he's doing because of distraction. But if a priest is consciously changing the ritual, and particularly the form of the sacraments, that means the words that are used, stop him and say, Father, the book says this, please say that.
Moving on, I want to get your take on Bishop Austin Vetter's decision to cancel all traditional Latin Masses in the Diocese of Helena, Montana. Now, this is effective on Ash Wednesday of all days. This contradicts Vetter's October statement that the traditional Latin Mass could continue. No official statement of the new policy has come from the diocese, but LifeSite News reports that Vetter is claiming that Rome, quote, is forcing his hand due to the dubia answered by the Vatican several weeks ago. Father Jerry, what do you make of this about-face here? And does that responsa, those answers to the dubia by the Vatican, have canonical or legislative force?
Well, I regret that the bishops made this decision. I hope he'll reverse it, because the responsa and Traditionis Custodes do not forbid having the traditional Latin Mass in your diocese. In fact, I've written a commentary, an interview with Diane Montagna on the Remnant website about this whole matter. And bishops have the right and the permission from the Holy See to continue to have the traditional Latin Mass in their diocese. And I would just say, you know, pastoral sensitivity and Christian love toward those who like the old Mass should prevail over any fear that you're going to upset either the Pope or the Vatican congregation by continuing this, because the Pope has not asked for every Mass to be abolished immediately. That's not in there. So I think the bishop needs to reconsider his decision.
No, it's an interesting point, particularly when we've heard since Vatican II, this is no one person's church, this is the church of the people of God. Well, then why aren't we trying to accommodate the faith of the people of God and those that are willing to turn out? Bob, the bishop here, he says he has no choice in the matter. Is that true?
Well, I agree with Father. I don't think that that's true at all. He's being, in a sense, more Catholic than the Pope, if we want to put it that way. The odd thing here, I think, is that the Pope gave us the reason for limiting the Latin Masses, that bishops were concerned about the disunity that was coming forward in some places. From what we can tell from the surveys that were sent out, they don't seem to have strongly indicated a worldwide problem of disunity. But let's put that aside for a moment. I think that a bishop like Bishop Vetter, if he is going to suppress the Latin Mass, which is not required by Rome, even with these strict guidelines now that have been issued, if he's going to suppress the Latin Mass in his diocese, I think he owes his people an explanation, and probably the rest of the country, because people look at these things and they begin to assume that, in fact, the Church is no longer going to allow the Latin Mass. If he has a problem, let's say he has one particular parish that's created a schism, a kind of a quasi-schism in his diocese, well, if he wants to explain that that's the reason why his hand was forced, then fine, he should explain that. But in the absence of that, to suppress the Latin Mass is to do something that even Rome at this present moment has not asked him to do. He has every choice to not do that.
No, that's insightful. And the pattern, the narrative, if you will, that the Mass is somehow forbidden or not allowed any longer in Catholic parishes, which is not the case. The Pope has certainly restricted the usage, but he hasn't forbidden it. And I think the narrative on the street is, oh, can't do that Latin Mass anymore. Father, this is another in a series of crackdowns on the Latin Mass. Why this ongoing fear of the traditional Mass upon which the Novus Ordo, the new vernacular Mass, is based, and this community of traditional Catholics who just want to worship in this ancient rite?
It's hard to understand, Raymond. It's hard to explain. I think the people against the Latin Mass are largely liturgists in Rome, and people agree with them, who view that everything before the council was basically needing to be overhauled in a radical way, and that any reference to the past is somehow unacceptable. It shouldn't be that way at all. Pope Benedict spoke about the new Mass enriching the old and the old Mass enriching the new. In other words, by the common experience of celebrating both forms, we can celebrate them better. So I really, it's something, I just shake my head, because the people I know who go to the Latin Mass are true Catholics who love the Church, and they're not the causes of disunity. You want causes of disunity, let's talk about the German synodal way. And yet somehow they continue meeting openly with no problems. So it's a mistaken and misplaced idea that the unity of the Church is being attacked by Latin Mass people. It's not.
No, they're a cause of hope and faith in the community because they're living out their faith in a deep way, it seems to me anyway. But it is a curious targeting of the faithful, and to the eye of some, a rupture in that hermeneutic of continuity. This seems the hermeneutic of rupture. Let's move on. There's a 3-day symposium on the priesthood underway this week at the Vatican. On the agenda, and this is getting very little coverage, is the role of women in the Church and celibacy. At least half a dozen cardinals will be addressing or presiding over these sessions. Cardinal Mark Willett organized the conference, and he says that their aim is to shatter a clericalized concept of the priesthood, and that he sees at the root of these recent scandals in the Church clericalism. Pope Francis opened the proceedings on Thursday, urging priests to keep closeness to God, their bishop, fellow priests, and the people. And he addressed clericalism this way. He said, this sense of belonging will in turn prove an antidote to the distortion of vocation that happens whenever we forget that the priestly life is owed to others, to the Lord and to the persons he has entrusted to us. Forgetting this is at the root of clericalism and its consequences. Clericalism is a distortion because it's based not on closeness, but on distance. When I think of clericalism, I also think of the clericalization of the laity, the creation of a small elite around the priest who end up betraying their own essential mission. Father, what do you make of the Pope's words there? And is clericalism a clericalized version of the priesthood the biggest problem in the Church today?
Well, I'll say this. I agree with the Pope that clericalism is a problem when it has to do with lording it over others in an unjust way. So using power either as a priest or a bishop, not to serve the people, but to either fleece them or to make use of them for your own personal power. And let's be blunt. The sex abuse crisis in the clergy has two aspects. One is criminal priests who harm people. They need to be removed from the priesthood. But what about bishops who protected them and used the money of the faithful to pay off the victims and make them be silent by making them sign non-disclosure agreements? I mean, we have seen a couple of $2 billion in the U.S. being spent about clerical problems caused by both evil priests and bishops who protected them. So that has to go. Clericalism on that level, bishops have to really be servants of the flock in the way a good shepherd is. Now, I would say the main problem in the priesthood nowadays has to do with the lack of a supernatural spirit, that the priesthood should not be viewed, and the Pope is correct about this, it's not just a managerial job. And the Pope does say in that long address he gave, do priests pray? Do they say their breviary and rosary with attention? Do they look upon their job simply as fulfilling roles? So I agree with the Pope. I would call it secularism and naturalism in the priesthood, which is basically say, I'm in charge of religion around here, I'll do it my way. And the answer is no. I represent Christ the Good Shepherd. I've been sanctified through holy orders. I have to live a holy life.
Yeah, and that focus on the clericalization of the laity, Bob, that was an interesting pivot there in the speech. I want you to talk to that. Also, the Pope never mentions the role of women in the Church. The subject is on the agenda, however, and it's related to that synodal way being pushed in Germany. The continued discussion of things that were essentially closed subjects in hopes of a change or an adjustment in teaching, that is troubling, no?
Yeah, I mean, first to address this question of the clericalization of the laity, of course, that has happened too, that as many people said, that we brought priests down and all of a sudden lay people are inside the sanctuary and it looks like you've got a crowd of lay and ordained people up there. I don't disagree with this pointing to clericalism as a problem. In my experience, though, at least here in the United States, it's quite the opposite. I think that priests are quite often gun-shy about presenting the teachings of the Church. And as a layman, let me just say that I expect my pastor or one of the assistants in the parish to teach Catholicism. And there are going to be places where not only is there teaching, but there are decisions that have to be made, and they have to be made in a spirit of charity and a spirit of service. But, you know, to reduce clericalism, even if you assume that it exists somewhere, doesn't mean that the priest is just going to be one among other people in the church community. Now, as to this question about women, I'm always nervous when this happens, and quite rightly, I think, because these things just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. Lots of us were very worried during the synod on the Amazon because there was a lot of discussion, as you recall, about married priests or deaconesses, and as it turned out, those two movements were turned back, and they were not realized despite the fears of many people. But yet, somewhere in the Vatican, I don't believe that this is coming so much from Francis, but somewhere in the Vatican there is this effort to keep putting these things forward in the hope that if you discuss them for long enough, somehow people are going to get used to the idea and maybe it will produce a change. I don't think it will under this Pope. I think he's held the line, to my great surprise, after the Amazon Synod with all the bizarre Pachamama stuff and other things that happened. But for the moment, I worry about the discussion, but I don't think Francis is quite there.
For those who looked away from Pachamama, just to recall, if you look at where that happened in the calendar, everything that happened afterward was a complete downward spiral in the church and society everywhere. So maybe there was some connection there between old Pachamama and what happened subsequently. Jens, Pope Francis is continuing to reshape the Curia. This week he announced a reorganization of the current structure of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, the Vatican's doctrinal office. He created an independent section of the CDF to handle disciplinary matters regarding cases of clerical sex abuse. And under the restructuring, the office of the CDF will operate independent doctrinal and disciplinary sections, each run by a separate secretary. Father, your thoughts on this reorganization? Is it canonically sound? And what does this hope to achieve?
Yes, it is canonically sound, and it does reflect the actual current operations of the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith. There are different sections in the congregation to deal with these issues. My concern, or let's say worry, would be if by making these into two autonomous sections and appointing secretaries or heads of these departments, that the prefect, who is the cardinal head of it, might become a figurehead figure. In other words, he wouldn't have effective control over those two areas, and I hope that's not the case. And there's always the problem of creeping bureaucracy. When you have too many chiefs, decisions can sometimes not be produced either with the bold courage that's needed or perhaps the rigor of analysis. But in principle, there's nothing wrong with this. I think my one question is, why is this happening now when we haven't yet gotten the general document for the reform of the Roman Curia? It seems strange to me to issue this document so quickly when the entire Curia has been subject to an extensive study for, I think, the last 4 or 5 years, and no general document in which this would have been placed if they had waited. So whatever the Pope's doing, hopefully it's going to produce good for the good order of the Church.
Bob, this is the most significant restructuring of the CDF in 3 decades. No personnel changes were announced, but the prefect, Cardinal Ladaria, is now 77 years old, and there are rumors that Archbishop Charles Scicluna may be in line for leadership. Your thoughts?
Well, look, it's good that we have this clarity about the lines of responsibility, because as many of us have complained, that clarity has not been exactly a hallmark of this papacy, and the fact that we've designated one segment is going to be devoted to doctrine and another to disciplines, I think is a good start. And our Father is right to worry, is this going to add another layer of bureaucracy? And people are saying the other dicasteries and congregations are actually having reductions in personnel, and this is one that's actually being beefed up, to the surprise of many who actually thought the Secretariat of State might become more powerful. My worry is this, that if it is indeed the case that Scicluna is going to replace Cardinal Ladario, he is a canon lawyer. No knock on canon lawyers, Father. But he's a canon lawyer, and he's not a theologian. And my worry about this, he's a very good guy in several respects. He's been the enforcer on abuse cases. He's been, the guy that they send to Chile or wherever they need an investigation, and he's reliable, and he's produced results. My problem,
not so much on doctrine, though, Bob.
Yeah, my worry is that in Malta, he and the cardinal got behind Amoris Laetitia with its weaknesses and ambiguities about married people, divorced and remarried people receiving communion. They've also been rather weak on homosexuality. So if the structure in place is good, but personnel changes make the way that congregation operates in a different direction, personnel is policy.
I want to move on to this Vatican financial trial before we run out of time. This trial resumes on Friday. According to testimony obtained by the Associated Press, one of Pope Francis's top advisors, Archbishop Peña-Parra, brought in members of the Italian Secret Service to sweep his office for bugs, and then he commissioned them to file intelligence reports on fellow workers, completely bypassing the Vatican's own police force. Now, prosecutors have accused the Holy See's longtime money manager, Italian brokers, and lawyers of fleecing the Pope for tens of millions in fees and extorting the Vatican for 15 million euros to secure ownership of a London property. This reads like a spy movie. Wiretappings, intrigue. I'm waiting for James Bond to show up. In fact, the AP reports the case details indicate that Pope Francis himself authorized Vatican prosecutors to wiretap Italian citizens on Italian soil. Bob, what gives here?
Well, I mean, you're right that this is like a spy novel. We don't know if they did that because they didn't trust their own Vatican police force that might have been compromised by things in the past, or whether this was something external to the Vatican because they were trying to hide something. Look, for me, I don't know that this is going to be sorted out. We'll see how the process actually goes in the trial. One of the concrete things that has just come to the fore that I think we all ought to keep our eye on is that there were $2 million or euros, I forget, sent to Australia by Cardinal Becciu, who is one of the people being investigated. And people want to know why he sent this to this company, New Star, that was involved with possibly with some of the wiretapping of Trump. Becciu himself said earlier on it was for the defense of Cardinal Pell. The bishops in Australia said they'd never received that money for that purpose. Pell himself has said his team never received the money for that purpose. So why did that $2 million? Why did that $2 million or 2 million euros get sent to Australia by Becciu? That to me is going to be a concrete thing that if we don't find out why that happened, then something is seriously awry.
Father Jerry, don't you have I mean, the Vatican is a city-state. It is its own sovereign country. Isn't there a problem when you have the Pope authorizing wiretaps of Italian citizens on Italian soil? I mean, he's crossing a border there.
Well, if that proves to be true, then that is going to cause a problem with the Italian government because that is foreign spying. You know, the Vatican is a sovereign territory. You know, bringing in the Italian police would lead you to conclude that Peña thought it was the Vatican police that were actually bugging him. So, you know, if that's the case, if the police force, the gendarmerie, et cetera, is doing wiretapping on its own personnel, we've got a serious problem there. Now, regarding the $2 million to Australia, I'll make one correction to Bob. Becciu never said the money was for Cardinal Pell's defense. That was his deputy, Monsignor Perlasca. And Perlasca turned state's evidence, so to speak. He's testifying on behalf of the prosecution. He said it was for the defense, and as Pell said, Raymond, the Bishops' Conference knows nothing about it. So, you know, Becciu's hiding behind statements, we can't talk about state secrets and all. Now, wait a minute. A cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church spent 2 years in jail, and you were sending money to Australia to a company that does eavesdropping on private communications. What in the world is going on here? I think Pell is absolutely right that Becciu must answer. He said he'll answer at trial. I hope the prosecutors really press him.
Yeah, well, and this connection now to this New Star group, which is a, you know, intelligence clearinghouse that was connected to the wiretapping and spying on the Trump administration here in the U.S., this thing has become a new onion that needs to be unpeeled to see who did what and to whom and how they were all connected. It's a very fascinating and sad story, I have to say. Before we run out of time, Father Jerry, you have a new book coming. April 7th. It's called Calming the Storm, an apt title. Give us a little preview. What is it?
Sure. It's an interview book with Diane Montagna, who is a Vatican journalist, and she had done an interview book with Bishop Athanasius Schneider of Kazakhstan.
I remember.
And then, Scott Hahn asked if she would do an interview book with me. The Emmaus Road Press is the publisher. And it is an interview book about many of the things that we talk about on the Papal Posse. So basically, crises and you know, I mean, we just have a little conversation here, ranging the whole spectrum. But let's say this: the book tries to give people encouragement that, number one, Catholic teaching doesn't change with the calendar; it's always the same. Catholic teaching can be applied to new questions, and then we have to look at society and say Catholics have to be prophetic. We have to stand up against gender ideology, the manipulation of truth, the manipulation of young people in schools and things like that. So we talk about that in this interview book. It'll be out at the, as you say, April 7th, and it's currently available. You can order it Amazon or at Emmaus Road Publishing, so you can get an advance copy. Or I should say that you can order a copy, and then it'll be available in about 8 weeks.
Excellent. Chance, we will leave it there. Thank you for your commentary, and you can find more commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray at thecatholicthing.org. And of course, Father Murray's new book, Calming the Storm, Navigating the Catholic Church and Society, is out April 7th. Thank you both. We'll check in with you soon.